Hey, my friends, Tom Henderson from RESGEN here, and I want to welcome you back to the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast, where we hear stories and have conversations about life in Christ, integrating our faith into every area of our life, and talk about ways that we as men can give life to others, at home, at work, and in the community. Today, I'm being joined by one of my favorite dudes on the planet, Ted Cunningham. Over the last 7 years, Ted has become a very close friend, an encourager, and a mentor to me, and has been a part of multiple RESGEN Men's Summits and date night comedy events, including this year's. Ted is an author, a comedian, and the founding pastor of Woodland Hills Family Church in Branson, Missouri. In addition to all that, Ted also invests in marriages at events all over the country, as well as through his many books and resources. On this episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast, which is actually Ted's third appearance as a guest, Ted and I focus our conversation on one main topic: advice you would give your newlywed self, specifically in 5 key categories. Guys, every conversation I have with Ted is always meaningful and fruitful, and this one is no exception. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode with Ted Cunningham. Ted, third time's the charm. You're back again. So good to have you at this table.
I came back for a new mug.
Yeah.
That was my whole point.
Well, you just let the secret out. That's how we thank our guests.
No.
You're
You're going to get more guests now. They're going to see this and go, do I get a Yeti mug?
Yeah,
Don't.
exactly. No, but for real, bro, 3 times on this show. You know how SNL has the 5 Timers Club? You get the jacket. I think we're gonna get there. I think we're gonna get. You're over halfway there. I think
A Yeti hoodie. You're gonna get a Yeti hoodie.
The Yeti jacket. I think it's got to be the jacket.
But maybe they will.
Well, we're gonna make one. We're gonna figure it out. Seriously, thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, I love it.
And I love that when you are here on the podcast, it means that you and I have been spending time together, sharing a stage and doing ministry together too.
Yeah.
And so I love that we can extend that into this time that we get to spend here and bring other people in on the conversation.
Yeah. So my first time here was 2019, and
We didn't have the pod.
You didn't.
No.
That's right.
Because it started with COVID.
But so we did Men's Summit and Date Night Comedy. So we're 6 years in. It's been fun to watch the growth, and on the years I'm not here, to just see you posting about it and to listen to the podcast and to watch the reels. It's good. It's fun to see the growth.
Yeah, well, thank you. And as I mentioned each time I think you're here, as well as just from the stage when I introduced you, is I just love that God has brought you into my life, the friendship we've been able to develop, the encouragement you are to me just throughout the year, and the mentorship that you brought into my life, not just on marriage and just some of the stuff that we're going to talk about here today, but just being a longtime ministry guy and having a pastor's heart, and we have that same heart. And so I'm just so grateful for the way that you do ministry, the way your motivation has always just stayed where it needs to be, and that it's always about Christ and not about you. And so I just want to begin with that, because I think that sometimes when people are listening or watching online, they don't know the full story about just the road that you travel to get here and who you are. And so being a part of this journey with you and having you on my road in ministry is a true blessing.
Oh, well, thanks, Tom.
Yeah. Well, today we really want to focus our time, as I said in the intro, just really on a couple different things. And we actually, so you were here as a part of the Men's Summit about a month ago, and then now you're in town here for Date Night Comedy again this year. And some of the stuff that we even talked about on the stage at Date Night Comedy was this advice that you would give your newlywed self, which even if you haven't been married a long time, you can still go back and be like, okay, man, 6 months ago, I wish I would have known this, right? Or
why didn't we cover that in premarital counseling?
Right, exactly. And you and I have both actually been married about the same amount of time, because you're celebrating 29 years in October.
Yeah.
Laura and I are celebrating 29 years in December. And so I didn't know that we were just, that's why, you have 2 more months of wisdom. Which is why I've been just soaking it in every time we're together. But so we're going to get into all that. But for those of you that the listeners that maybe have not heard you before, this is the first time that they're finding out who Ted Cunningham is. I'd love just for you to give a quick little introduction of who you are before we kind of dive in today.
So I was born in a small
all the way back. I want it all.
No, I'm from Chicago. If anyone's listened to my sermons or heard my comedy, they know I grew up in an independent, fundamental, premillennial, King James Version only Baptist church. So very conservative upbringing. I met my wife, Amy, on a blind date at Liberty University in 1995.
Yeah.
We were married at the end of 1996. Went to South Georgia for a couple of years, and I served as associate pastor for who to this day is still my best friend, Austin DeLoach, who actually introduced Amy and I on that blind date. So I felt like I had to serve him for a couple of years, and served him there in South Georgia, then went to Dallas seminary, and then moved to Missouri. We started a church 23 years ago, Woodland Hills Family Church, and have been there ever since. We have 2 kids now, raised our kids in the church. My son is 19, my daughter's 21, and yeah, so it's been a fun season. About 23 years ago when we were starting the church was when I met Dr. Gary Smalley, and he started the church with us, was an elder up until the time he passed away. So he passed away about 9 years ago, and yeah, I remember marriage and family's always been a passion within my ministry, going all the way back to when we were first married.
Yeah.
And Austin wasn't married, and so anytime a marriage message popped up at church, I'm 22 years old, newly married. He's like, "You're the guy. I want you to stand up there and instruct this congregation on how to have a great marriage. Well, I'm a newlywed loving life. I'm going to instruct all these old guys. Here's how you do it."
Yeah.
And so it was always a passion. And so the Lord brought Gary and I together. Gary started having me edit chapters in books. And then he finally came to me and said, "Why don't we write a book together?" And, he's coming to the end of his ministry. His health was failing. And he started taking me along to marriage conferences. And, it was a pretty loose plan at these conferences based on how he felt. But I would do sessions when he felt like, okay, I'm pretty much done this weekend. And so I started doing conferences. I started doing events that he didn't want to do. So, or church would call and Gary was unavailable. And a lot of my early year introductions at events were, we tried to get Gary Smalley. He was unavailable. They sent this guy. We don't even know who this guy is. But he's got some of Gary's stuff. And so Gary was my mentor. And probably the greatest compliment I hear from any of preaching or teaching are when the senior adults in the room who knew Gary and followed Gary come up to me and go, I completely see Gary in your life.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the Paul-Timothy relationship. That as Paul poured into Timothy, you can't help it. I mean, that's exactly that's when people describe discipleship to me nowadays as let's get together for coffee. I'm like, that's not discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
Discipleship is daily walking with someone, and they're and you now are following Christ as they are following Christ. Mm-hmm. And so some of my mannerisms, my content, I quote Gary all the time and probably will until the Lord calls me home. I had a publisher once tell me, or not a publisher, an editor tell me in a book, "Hey, I really need you to stop quoting Gary Smalley. It takes away from your credibility." And I said, "You're fired." No, I didn't fire. But I said, I remember I was fired up. Yeah. I got home. I told Amy, I said, "Can you believe it?" And I will sacrifice credibility all day long for the honor that that I owe that guy. I love him, miss him. Yeah. And I want that for everybody, And Amy to this day says, you could have had a mega church pastor mentor you in the ways of organizational leadership. And she goes, "I am so grateful that God brought a marriage mentor into your life." And now it's our ministry. Yeah. And, if I were to end all of it tomorrow, my wife and kids and now my son-in-law, there would be this profound sadness because, they're all a part of it. I get up and tell stories about them. Yeah. Right? So, and that's what brings me here to Sioux Falls. And I love it. I truly find great joy in helping couples enjoy life together.
Yeah. and helping couples win. I mean,
Yeah.
that's I mean, such a big a big statement and platform that you have, the resource that you created, because you think about it, and just even at age 22, newly married, already having
Marriage expert.
yeah, that's sorry, I'll use that term next time. But being an expert at such a young age, really a phenom. You were a phenom for sure.
I am so glad we didn't have good church recordings back then. Everything's online now.
No,
Whatever tape that was on is destroyed. It's missing in the archives.
I listened to
Never
some
to
of
be
my
found.
first sermons, and I'm like, wow, that is horrendous.
You knew nothing. I knew nothing. I can't believe people let me say that. Why didn't I get more? Oh, well, we didn't have email. Oh, okay, that's why. That's why I didn't get any.
Exactly. But so even at 22, Ted, so like to have this passion for marriage, where would you say that passion came from? Obviously, the Holy Spirit and the Lord, downloaded that into you. But like, was that just something because you saw other marriages that were struggling? And you said, I don't want that a part of my life, or like, where do you think that came from?
No, at Liberty, Dr. Falwell was passionate. If I don't know who came up with the term for Christian colleges, Ring by Spring. I think it was Dr. Jerry Falwell at Liberty University, because that was his passion. He taught about marriage all the time. He had a great marriage with his wife, Maisel. And it was just talked so much about at Liberty. I guess and once I found Amy and pursued that relationship, I had good mentors early on and good premarital counseling early on to tell me, hey, your ministry will only go as far as your marriage goes. So if you let this this is where it's going to,
Yes.
So I always put the time and the energy into it. And I guess I would say, I know some people say, well, it's your personality. Well, I'm a strong personality, a fun-loving personality, but I also saw that marriage is this deep friendship, companionship journey, and if you pursue it, it's not a tag along. It truly is something. I wake up every day looking forward to the adventure we're going to be on together, looking forward to continuing to build. And that's what my message I shared just a little bit last night. I actually locked eyes with your kids, your boys, when I said this. I go, it's why when I look at the next generation, I don't want them ever to see marriage as a weight. I want you to see you can get married and build something together.
Yes.
You have a lifelong journeying partner to walk alongside you and not hold you back or keep you from, but you're both just every day cheering one another on. I mean, so you marry your friend and cheerleader and companion and, encourager, confronter when necessary. And so I don't know, that just always was in me from the very beginning, seeing the benefit of it. Whereas marriage for a lot of generations was survival. We didn't have to deal with that as much in our generation, but we kind of had the more building something together. And so that was just from the time we got married. I've always enjoyed my marriage, and I wanted that for other people.
Yeah. You talk about just the power of I mean, you've used the word mentor a couple different times already, and just the power of mentorship. We're going to get into that even just in the importance of just what would you tell your newlywed self and the importance of mentorship. But I think about just, Amy's comment to you about, I'm so glad that you had a mentor like Gary Smalley, right?
Yeah.
And I've said this so many times on episodes. You heard me share about, my very first pastor, and he's been a guest on this.
Yeah.
His wife even jumped on for a few moments, which was an amazing thing.
She stepped back there and jumped on here. Hey, you left out.
Yeah. Well, they were in Oregon. We zoomed with them. So all of a sudden she just showed up. It was awesome. But like, I'm so thankful that I had a mentor like that, and I've said this before, but when he hired me, when I asked him, why'd you hire me? And he said, it's a great question, because, you don't know how to preach, don't know how to teach, you don't know how to manage a budget, you don't know how to work with teams or leaders or whatever. And I'm like, being like, so why did you hire me? Right. And he said, but those are the things I can teach you. I can teach you all that, but what I can't teach you is heart. And that's what you do have. And he taught me so many important things, specifically in the preaching, and not even just teaching it, but then he modeled it. And see, that's what Gary did for you as well. It's one thing if he just tells you, hey, Ted, this is what the deal is, right? But then you got to watch him do it.
Yeah.
And he lived out. And that's where you really establish being a trustworthy person, and that you're speaking the truth with your lips, but then you're modeling it with your life.
Yeah.
And, Gary did that for you. Chris did that for me. And one of the most important things that I got to watch him do was preach the word and say and tell me over and over again, Tom, listen, you can get by with charisma, jokes, all the different things. You can get by, but always make those supplemental to the word. Make them in support of the word. Don't make the word supportive of that. And that was really important for me as a 23-year-old dude, trying to figure out what ministry was. I just wanted to reach teenagers for Jesus. But just the power of mentorship it's been so important in my life. And to hear that is such a big reason why you're doing what you're doing and why you've been able to do it so long and with the integrity that you've done it. I mean, and you always give credit to Gary and you honor him in that, and which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And I have a couple guys at church now that are in their 20s. One of them coming alongside me, and I'm really trying to figure out how do I do for them what Gary did for me. And I mean, 51 years old, it just kind of snuck up on me real quick. And so I even sent you that one document called The Business Side of Speaking. And the point of that was a young man in our church going, I want you to, how do I even break into this as I get an invitation here or there? And I'm like, okay. And as I sat down, I realized this is what mentors give you so much tacit knowledge that if you were to try to figure out what did they teach me? And so I sat down one day and I'm like, everything I've learned, a lot, most of it from Gary, but then a lot I picked up along the way about how do you have a speaking ministry? And I started writing it down, and then I would give it to other guys and they'd be like, yeah, what about this? What about this? I'm like, there's so much tacit knowledge that I don't think we want to put everything in a Bible study, don't we? We want to put everything into a booklet that you can give. But I realize the greatest lessons I learned from Gary, I don't think could ever be put in a booklet. I mean, you can put principles and steps in it, but it's like I picked up so much tacit knowledge from him that is so hard to get into a book. And so this is why my friend Alex Amaya in Tulsa says, if you're looking for someone to mentor you or disciple you, do not invite them to coffee, offer to mow their lawn. And he goes through all this, and I went, okay, when Gary had a gazebo delivered in pieces to his house, I was there unloading the truck with him. I traveled with him just to be a travel companion and carry his bags. I edited when he wanted me to edit. I was alone, and I think that's what it meant when you had a rabbi, right? You just, wherever he went, you followed him. And so when I see people trying to boil discipleship down to 6-week courses, I go, it's part of it. And I'm not dismissing it. But
it's both and.
It's both and to have that person. And so I'm sitting here realizing I feel like 51, boy, I still got good 10, 15 years of actually doing it. But boy, I got to start carving out more time to showing it. And whereas, I travel with my kids a lot, like my daughter and son-in-law are with me on this trip.
Yeah.
My son will be with me on next weekend's trip. And it's like, now I think I need to add another person to the mix, and we'll be traveling, because that to me is how we're passing on leadership to the next generation.
Yeah. Well, and Jesus did that. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. Why don't we do that more?
Right. Yeah. So I think it's a great point. Which I think
I'll clean. You need me to clean the office today when I'm done. What do you want me to do here?
Yeah. Well, we have no snow for you to shovel for me. We can't mow the lawn, so I guess that's
Every time I set this log down, I want to make sure I'm setting it down just right.
So all those on YouTube watching. Yeah. Well, let's get into this whole idea of advice that you would give your newlywed self, because I think that we all have things that, I've married almost 29 years, just like you. But like I said earlier, regardless of how long you've been married, you can look back and say, this is the advice I would give myself. And specifically, in kind of some key areas. I think when you enter marriage, first of all, when you enter marriage and you're standing at the altar and you say, in sickness and in health, in richer and poorer, good times and in bad, you really have no clue what you're saying.
Yeah, we spent way too much time in premarital on budgeting. There's so many more other things to get into.
And finances are important. We're going to get into that and things that you can say about money. But you go in not knowing you don't know what you don't know. Yep. That's just a reality. And a lot of times you go in expecting that marriage is going to either be better than what you experienced as a kid, or wanting something better or different than you had as a kid, or boy, it's going to be just like that. And oftentimes it's neither of those, and it's all over the map, right?
Yeah.
And most of the time it is.
Yeah.
So, so let's just talk about some of these areas about like, so if you could go back with you and Amy, and we'll just have kind of a fun conversation about this. What advice would you have given like in the area of conflict? Because conflict, of course, is unavoidable.
Yeah.
And the first month of your marriage, maybe it's like, oh man, everything's perfect. We don't really argue about anything, but then all of a sudden at some point you're going to argue about something and deal with conflict. So what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah. So early in relationship formation, you focus on similarities, what we have in common. And this is why when you're meeting with premarital couples, you have to ask, tell me about your last fight. And, you get plenty of them. They're like, oh, that's amazing. We've never really had a fight. And then you have to go, oh, okay. If you could think about what do you think will be your trigger? What will be something you fight over? We've thought about that too. And I just don't really see anything. And then you're like, oh, okay. All right, listen, there is coming a pivot in this relationship where you're going to move from focusing on similarities to shining a spotlight on your differences. Right now, you downplay differences, but you're going to start to go, okay, this was cute for the first year. And so what I encourage couples, because this is what I wish I would have known early on, stay aligned on the big things, our faith, our core values, being on mission as a couple, and just let the little things go. Now, Solomon does say, chase the foxes, right? And that means it's the little things that we don't pay attention to. I'm not saying ignore them.
Yeah, don't put them all under the rug or whatever.
Rug. I'm saying we acknowledge that is a little difference between you and I, Amy. And you know what? We're going to say no big deal. That's no big deal. The other thing, because conflict and communication go together, I would say, Ted, stop telling Amy. Never again tell Amy how to feel. Never again tell her, I wish you didn't feel that way. Never again apologize for her feelings. Healthy people aren't threatened by the opinions and feelings of others. So don't tell her how to feel. Ted, never again blame her for how you feel. This one, Ted, take personal responsibility. And I think we all get that early on. We're taught that you're in charge of your heart, guard your heart. But I just don't think we focus on it enough to be like, everything I am feeling is 100% mine. And that's why what happens to you, you may be 0% to blame for what happens to you, but you are 100% responsible for your healing, for your treatment of others, feelings, words, actions. That's 100% on you. No matter what trauma you've been through, no matter who's hurt you, no matter who's walked away from you, Ted, you have to own that. And if you don't, somebody's going to say something that hurts you at church, and you're going to take that out on Amy because you haven't taken responsibility for that. And now you're blamed. So she says something that reminds you of that, and take 100%. And then the fun one, because we're at this point where 30 years of marriage, you know each other so well. I would say, Ted, when you get to the point you can finish Amy's sentences, don't. Don't. You don't need to finish the conversation for her. That's not connection. She's looking for connection.
Yeah.
So let her share. And don't be like, oh, I know what. If you have a solution, keep it to yourself. This is one, my friend Doug Fields gave me this. And the first time he told me this, I was like, that's so brilliant. Why did I have to wait till I was 20 years into marriage to learn it? But he says, you don't have to say everything you think. And here's why this is important for the next generation of couples.
Yeah.
We have overused and overemphasized the terms vulnerability, transparency, and authenticity. Here's what I need you to add to the list of vulnerability, transparency, and authenticity. Discernment.
Yeah.
Discernment is just as important of a word. So in conflict, if you want to keep it going and you want to keep the fight happening, blame, assign, tell your spouse how to feel, finish the statement for them, listen to reply rather than understand. Those are and I'm telling you, we did premarital counseling. We went through all the prepare, enrich, assessments. Why did I not get that? Why did that not come through? And that's what I would go back and share. And the reason I do this exercise of coaching my newlywed self, we have a marriage 911 program at our church that's for couples in crisis. And we're up to 60 marriage mentors at our church, all meeting with someone currently. I just talked to our elder over that program this week. And we had a couple last year at 49 years married went through marriage 911. That alone is impressive to me.
Yeah.
That you would say after 49 years, we're not giving up on this marriage.
Yeah.
Because marriage 911 is for couples in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
At their end, we don't know what else to do. And you would think at 49 years of marriage, you're like, we're just going to ride this out.
Right.
Whatever it looks.
Nothing's a big
Yeah. No, but he sent me an email some time ago. It's one of the best emails I've ever got. He was just wanting to say thank you for marriage 911 and how it saved our marriage. And I'm like, it's one thing. I've been married 7 years and this thing saved my marriage. I'm ready to give it another shot. 49 years married. And then he said, with how many times, Tom, have we heard someone say, I wish I would have known this early on?
Right.
And so this goes back to what we started talking about with mentors is it's not just coaching my newlywed self. It's when I'm now with that couple married 2 years, and I'm not one to give a ton of unsolicited advice, but you have those moments where a question's asked and it's like, I could tell you right now what to do. Here's what I wish I would have known.
Yes. Yeah.
When I was in your spot right now, because they're going through the exact same things you went through.
Right.
And I've just, gray hair in the Bible is supposed to come with wisdom. Remember, Proverbs are not a guarantee. They're Proverbs. But I hopefully we are at 30 years of marriage learning some things, not just for our own marriage, but for another person's marriage. And I think about this couple with their children and grandchildren, what they're able now to take and pour into others. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's why I think it's a good exercise.
Yeah, that's so good. I think about one of the things that I would share with myself was, I was always taught, it's even, we read it in scripture of, do not let the sun go down on your anger. And so I went into marriage thinking that, well, literally that meant that if there's some sort of disagreement, and my joke is Laura and I really, we don't argue, we have what we call intense fellowship. And, but whatever it was, that we needed to take care of whatever that was before.
Never go to bed angry.
Never go to bed angry. Exactly. And I'm one that really is one to just continue to okay, we're going to take care of this. And I mean, that's just my personality and we'll but Laura's one that she's like, no, I need time. I want to process. I'm going to get a good night's sleep so that we can both have a much better and more adult conversation, as opposed to a conversation on the playground or something. And I just think about how many arguments, moments of intense fellowships could have been shortened if I would have been wiser in understanding that, what, there is a time to just say, we're gonna push pause on this. We're gonna get some rest, and then we're gonna come back.
I think you can help a lot of people with that because can I bring the Bible in?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So, that don't go to bed angry.
Yeah.
We misunderstand what Paul's saying in Ephesians 4 with that. And if you go to your Bible and you go down on the footnote from that, it'll say Psalm 4:4. And what Paul is doing is actually quoting Psalm 4:4. And listen to what Psalm 4:4 says, which Laura's going to be like, put that on a plaque in our put it on our bedroom wall.
Yeah, thankfully I did learn that after a little while, but we probably should still have it on a plaque.
Most couples who get premarital counseling in the church get that belief in their heart and in their marriage, you should never go to bed angry, and it's just not true.
Right.
What Paul's quoting is Psalm 4:4 that says, tremble and do not sin. When you are on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. That's actually what he's saying in Ephesians 4, meaning it is better to go to bed angry and silent than to go to bed fighting right before you fall asleep, trying to resolve that. So he's saying in those moments, silence is powerful. Holding back your words is powerful. Taking that time to go to the Lord. And this is ponder in your hearts what's going on. And yet we've taught generations of couples, work it out, fight it, go for it. Or what if you both go to your separate corners, you stay silent. And you know this. How many times have you gone to bed mad and silent, and you wake up the next day and be like, okay, what were we fighting about again?
Yeah.
You've even forgotten what you're fighting about, or you have brand new, fresh perspective.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, physically you were going through, and we know this from research, right? We're not going to solve really anything in the first 15, 20 minutes of a heated conflict because physiologically we're just all
and a lot of times we just want to win.
So that's I'm glad you brought that up because that's advice I think a lot of couples need to be reminded. But it's okay to go to bed mad. Just go to bed silent.
Yeah. That's really good. Let's tackle another kind of a key topic. You mentioned just budgeting and how we do spend a lot of time in budget conversations, often in premarital counseling. But let's just talk about just advice that you would go back and give your newlywed self in the area of money.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, I think that this is something that's really important to talk about even just with this generation, because I think a lot of times, when couples go get married now, they expect automatically that they're going to have the same kind of lifestyle that they have grown up in. And maybe it's a middle-class family, upper middle class or whatever. And so they haven't necessarily had to experience and even in the world of instant gratification.
We want in 3 years what our parents spent 30 years accumulating.
Right, exactly. So I think this is a really important conversation because I mean, I don't know about you, but when Laura and I got married, I mean, we literally had nothing.
Yeah.
I mean,
most couples get married broke.
broke. And then you just got to figure it out.
Yeah.
So go back. What would you tell advice would you give on money?
Get more money. That would be my first thing.
Find it. Just,
I mean,
what do you got to do? Start that side.
Side. You know what? I tell my kids this all the time. I go, your generation is totally blessed with the gig economy in a lot of ways. I know there's downfalls to everything, but I said that when we looked for side hustles, it was raking or mowing. We were very limited
for $5.
our options. Yeah, especially when we were under 16 and had to walk everywhere. We were very limited. I mean, you guys, the opportunities that you have. And so I think I would just be reminded that, no one's hiring you at 22 years old because of your expertise. So, and I start with work, obviously, because my dad, my parents taught me work, give, save, spend, and in that order. I joke that, my dad was the envelope guy long before you ever heard the name Dave Ramsey. My dad loved envelopes. And so if I earned $10 mowing a lawn, I brought it home. He had a tithe envelope, a missions envelope, a savings envelope, and a spending envelope that was always empty. I said there was never, he always made sure it funneled into these three and left this one empty. And those were the days, remember, of passport savings books?
Oh, yeah.
It would go, and the teller would actually write down the amount and put her signature there. I mean, we should have gotten into forging because that would have been that's so easy to. I actually have more than you think. But so it all started with work for us, and that our parents put into my brother and I work. And so I would just remind myself at a young age, do not try to impress the people you work for with what you know. Instead, impress them with showing up on time, staying later if you need to, working hard, avoid terms like, well, that's not in my job description. Just hustle.
Yeah.
You need hustle in your 20s as you gain more knowledge and expertise. We did this I've been a tither my whole life. Tithing and missions has been something that's been part of me because of what my dad put in me. So, I think early on, I would say tithing was the finish line for me, and I never want tithing to be the finish line. I want it to be kind of the starting point. And so I would encourage my newlywed self, even though we don't have a lot, to sacrifice more to give more. We saved, but now that I'm 51, man, I wish I would have done that $100 a week thing from the time I was 18.
Yeah,
right. Wouldn't be sitting here right now. I mean. Getting my free Yeti.
Yes, you would.
I know I would. So, but yeah, so save and then spending. I would go back and make sure Amy and I are aligned quicker, and that's what good premarital counseling will get to the heart of the issues first. So we have very different messages written on our heart about money: working, giving, saving, spending. We just come from different homes, different families of origin. So. I tell newlywed couples, get on the same page fast.
That's so good.
Don't wait until you think, well, now we've got money, we can talk about it, because you will have already established your habits.
Yes.
As a couple.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was thinking about for Laura and I, is that whole alignment was so important, because what ended up happening with us was that she just kind of said, okay, yeah, you take care of it. But then what ended up happening was that I began to control.
Yeah.
And when one person is in control, that leads to sometimes conflicts, right? That's fellowship. And then you go to bed angry, or you won't go to bed angry. And so figuring out, how do you have that conversation?
Yeah.
And where you really lay it out and say, hey, you know what, this literally is like, this is what we're bringing home. And we need to be in alignment of, okay, how do we not overspend? Because, I grew up in a situation where we didn't have funding. And then when my dad was still a part of the picture, there was way overspending, credit cards, all of that. So I grew up, honestly, Ted, like in fear of debt. And if I'm being honest, really, I was fearful of spending money.
Yeah.
I really was.
Sure.
Like, I was fearful of spending money, because I was taught, like, once you spend it, you can't get it back.
Yeah.
And so you're saving, or you're accumulating the money that you need to live, but you're so afraid to spend it that it's actually becoming a god, and it's crippling.
Yeah.
And so there's so many years that was a big challenge for Laura and I to overcome, is because I was fearful of running out of money.
Yeah. Well, and Shanti Feldhahn did a lot of research on this. Money and sex are two of the most difficult conversations to have.
Yeah.
So get aligned early on. I would say even before that, talk about it.
Yeah.
Early. You have to discuss it. And the behavior of your spouse needs to be discussed, just like your behavior needs to be discussed. And Amy didn't know this early on. It's a joke now, because my wife is a caregiving person. Like, she's really thoughtful about what she says to people.
Yeah.
And has always been very kind to me in 29 years of marriage. But when we had a budget, but there was really no purpose. We just didn't have any money to budget. Like, we were, our first apartment was brand new. We were first ones to move into it. It was $600 a month. And, I was a bivocational pastor, worked at a Lowe's distribution center, and associate pastor at a church, making $10,000 a year.
Yeah.
And I remember when they bumped me up $50 a week, I'm like, what are we going to do with all this money? This is too much.
Yeah.
And I remember telling the church, you're giving me $2,500 more a year. I was like blown away by it. But I remember when something would come in, if we had a bonus, something come in, whether it be, somebody give us $200 just as a gift, and we would go do something. And then I remember, this is early on in marriage, I go, Amy, we're going to have to, this month, if we could hold back a little bit on spending. And then Amy said this one time, and think about it, I'm talking about it 30 years later. She goes, well, feast or famine around this place, isn't it? Well, what that does to a guy to hear feast or famine, like, some months you provide, some months you don't. It's like, no, we're making it. Yeah. We're providing. We're just probably won't go to Texas Roadhouse twice this month, or we won't, that's where we were as newlyweds a year into marriage. But I can remember she only said it like twice, and now she laughs when I go, because now we have fun conversations like, what do we want to give to this month? It's a little bit different of a conversation.
Yeah.
She will, as a callback, just to be fun, be like, wow, feast or famine around this joint, like that, because it doesn't hurt me like it did when you're first married. Yeah. I'm like, man, I'm a lousy husband.
Right. But
that's what an open, regular conversation. And I joke about, we were taught how to budget. You got to get to the budgeting. This is a surface conversation. It's the messages underneath it. And you just said it. I was fearful of spending money.
Yeah.
For your spouse to know that means even if they're at a store and they need to spend something, that they would call and be like, hey, it costs this. Just that talking it out alleviates that fear.
Yeah. So let's just say that, because, the hard part is if you're listening to this and you're like, well, okay, so we're not aligned. Yeah. And this is a source of conflict. So how does that conversation even start? How does that happen? Sometimes you do need to bring in, obviously, other people that can kind of from the outside that help you see different things. That's the powerful, I think, when you have the powerful presence of someone else that you trust that can speak into you and saying, hey, here's what we're seeing. But what advice do you give, Ted, when someone says, we're not aligned in this?
Okay, so I would
just
break
in all these categories, but even just money. But money.
Let's stick with money, because I think sometimes couples look at, we got two options. And this is my favorite thing to do as a counselor. We got way more than two options. There's way more than two options. The reason you think we have two options is because I have my preferred option, you have your preferred option. And as a counselor or as a pastor, you get to come in and go, have you guys thought about? And they're both like, so what? One of the things you can do is start training on a third option in everything. To give you an example, I just worked with a couple on this. Spouse has a sibling that's an alcoholic, causes a lot of problems at family gatherings. They want to cut this person out of their, one spouse wants to cut this person out, no longer invited to family gatherings. The other spouse is saying, yeah, but then our kids will have no relationship with their cousin, and I want our kids to have a relationship. These are real issues. So they bring to me to help us work through this because there's two options. I always love this when I get a cut him out completely. We'll never see him again. He's never allowed at a family gathering. To no, he still needs to be allowed. So I ask, well, for them, it means this person travels here, spends 3 days with them over Thanksgiving. And I go, okay, let's talk about a third option. And as you start working through the third option, you can see both of them like, well, we're a team. This is starting to make more sense. And both of us, I think we do this when we negotiate peace treaties, right? With countries, right? All right, what are you giving? What are you giving? What are you backing down on? What are you backing down on? And what we came away with this couple, I thought it was fantastic. They did the work. They just realized, oh, we're stuck on our two options. I said, you say Thanksgiving dinner is 4 to 6, or if later in the day is worse for this guy. I mean, we're going to be serving dinner at 4. We're asking everybody, 6, and he's at a hotel. I mean, there's boundaries, there's exposure, but they developed a third option with money, saying we're not allowed money. You got work, you got giving, savings, and spending. I guarantee you they're aligned somewhere on that. So eliminate what you're aligned on from the conversation. If you're both hard workers and you're working hard, obviously frustrated, we may not make as much as we want to make. So there may be some conversation there of a side hustle or whatever. But if you're aligned on work, remove that. If you're both committed to giving, and like we've both been tithers, but I know I work with a lot of couples where one wants to tithe and the other's like, we can't afford to tithe. So keep that on the table. We have to discuss the giving. But you know as well as I do, it's this last one. It's the spending.
Yeah, right.
Every marriage has a spender and a saver. So, drill down on it and be like, put both options that you think are on the table and separate them a little bit and go, hey, this center area, that's for the third option. We're going to find some common ground on this.
Yeah, that's good. All right, let's jump to another one here. Just in the area of household chores, divvying out responsibilities. Always a fun one to discuss and figure out, okay, well, I do this, you do this. A lot of times we think, well, are we doing things evenly? One of the things that I think you and I both have just probably talked about multiple times in different messages, there is no such thing as 50-50. It's 100-100, but what does that look like in the different areas? So just thinking about in chores, does it work to say, okay, I'll do everything but bathrooms? Or does it work to think like, okay, you're on laundry and I'm on dishes? Or
you do what I think I've caught my wife doing lately. She loads the dishwasher improperly every couple of months, and I open it, and I'm like, okay, this is intentional here. This is aggressive, the way you're stacking bowls on top of it. She's like, what? I have no idea. That's her way to be like, I got it. I'm just doing the dishes. All right.
I'll never forget. I used to love Everybody Loves Raymond and that TV show. I'll never forget the episode where he was purposefully screwing up. He's put everything in the laundry, like everything in the wash. So it's all like, bleeding into the other. And then
maybe that's where she got it.
And she realized, wait a second, you've been doing all this on purpose. And he's like, what?
What? How in the world? So I didn't realize University of Florida did a study because, most divorces take place in the first 5 years of marriage. So they wanted to see what are the troubled areas that every couple struggles with in those first 5 years primarily. Because typically by the time you're 20, 30 years in, you got a lot of the, it's the things we laugh at when young couples are dealing with stuff like, oh yeah, you'll work through that. But I mean, in the top of that list is household chores that couples still struggle. And it's not just with, this is your list, this is my list. It's me checking up on your list. Like, hey, I just walked through and you're not, can we, when are you going to clean that bathroom again, right? Or I've been gone all day. This is where I got into
That's
it
good.
with a buddy of mine who he disciples a group of guides, and they all were complaining about their wives because they think I go to work and crush it all day, and I come home. He goes, I don't understand why there should be dishes in the sink. And I'm like, I go, how do you disciple him on that one there, my brother? But yeah, and what do you say? So there's also the why didn't this get done approach to that. And so here's simply what I tell, we're going back to what I would tell my newlywed self.
Yeah.
Ted, your way's not the only way.
Yeah.
So you got to be open to other ways of doing it. And a lot of it's what I grew up vacuuming. We vacuumed the living room at our house that we never used. And we weren't allowed to walk in that living room. Did you have that living room? That was a 70s, 80s thing.
That's not a couch
No.
that you sit on.
And my mom taught me how to vacuum to where the triangle
Yep.
were in the room. And if footprints were in there, we had to vacuum the whole room again to get that triangle back in. So all of that to say is you kind of begin to think that your way's the only way.
Yep.
So I would tell myself early on, your way's not the only way. Second thing I would tell myself is a different way. It's not the wrong way. Your way's not the only way. A different way's not the wrong way. And this is the big one and this, I think, guides us in our marriage to this day. Don't let getting your way get in the way of a great marriage. So be able to look at it and go, that is just another way of doing it. And really the only household chore that I don't know why maybe it's a personality thing, but the dishwasher is that there's just a certain way.
That you liked it?
Well, there is an effect. Everything needs exposure is what I try to tell my whole family. And this thing spins around and this, you see what I'm saying? There's no water that's going to hit that. And I don't know if it's me going, this is so obvious. This is so obvious. And I think you do it, or you all are doing this now. What are the meetings like when I'm not around here? But Ted, learn to say again, no big deal.
Yeah.
Let it go. And Amy and I don't know who told us this when our kids were being raised and messing up our whole system, because then you throw kids into all this.
Right.
And, we're raising kids, which means the house isn't going to be perfect. The basketball goal is going to wear a section of the yard out. We're raising kids, not grass.
Yeah.
So we had to learn to just let things go. So for the neat freaks out there, I don't know how to help you.
Yeah.
If you're raising kids, but, we never really struggled with the household chore thing, but
Yeah.
there were times I'd be like, that's just not how we did it.
Yeah.
I just would let things go more.
Yeah, that's good. That is good. And I think, and the reason I say, like, listen, I'll do anything with bathrooms, that was really a confession. That was really a confession.
I
To get
get
the bath, like that's a struggle for me. That's
Yeah.
a challenge for me. And Laura's like, okay, I'll let that one go. But what I have had to do is the timing of it is the interesting thing, because I'm the kind of a personality, I've always been this way, where if something needs to be done, well, it should have been done last week.
Yeah.
And so I mean, that's just kind of my personality, because I'm very production mindset.
Yeah.
Like I remember having multiple conversations with my boys when they'd be like, Dad, it's not about productivity all the time. And I'd be like, I'm pretty sure that it is. I think it is, but that's also, I've had to realize about myself. And that's where even just when you think about, you begin to know more about yourself the older you get, right?
Yeah.
And the more conversations you have, the willingness that you have to allow other people to speak into your life, the power of mentorship.
Yeah.
But then where you can really look back and say, man, why was I making that such a big deal?
Yeah.
Like, what's the why behind that? And I learned far too late. And so this is where, if I could go back, is saying, my value and worth doesn't come from how productive I was,
Yeah.
or how clean the house is, or how, the perception of me because of the lawn looking great, or
Yeah.
whatever, so that would be in my headspace where I would need to.
Well, then you're the one they created the meme for that says, I told you I would do that project and get it done, and I don't need you reminding me every 6 months. So in our house, I'm the guy that hangs stuff on the walls.
Yeah.
And so Amy will I know where she wants stuff hung. So if there's a picture that she's bought, she'll hang it against the wall deal. And And there are times it'll sit there for a couple weeks. And that's my joke. Hey, I'm going to get to that picture. And I don't need to be told every month or so about it. But honestly, you know why it's not hung? I go back and look. If it doesn't have that wire going across it so I can do one screw, if it's got two that it's going to line up.
Measure?
And that thing's going to lay there against that wall for a long time until somebody can get me a wire to put in the two holes and do that thing they do. Oh, I hate hanging pictures that require two screws.
All right. We just got a couple more. We got a few minutes more here of time together. So I want to touch on these last two.
We're only hitting the biggest issues that couples deal with.
I know. And we're knocking it all out. We're knocking it all out. That's it. I mean, it's ready to go. Yeah. Advice you tell your newlywed self, especially like when on parenting and when kids come into the picture, because again, like you just mentioned it. You've got your the direction you're heading. You've got your standards set up, and then all of a sudden kids enter the picture and screw everything up. Adding the joy, no question. But at the same time,
children will suck the very life right out of you.
So advice that you go back and give as far as in parenting.
First thing, best thing I've ever heard, Gary told me this all the time: the days go slow and the years go fast. And to just be reminded of parenting is for a season. Being a parent is for a lifetime. So your relationship with them is going to change, not just one day when they walk an aisle, but all throughout the journey. Your child is changing and your relationship with them needs to change. And so we say it in our home and in our church all the time: parenting is a journey from control to influence. I didn't start sharing that till about 10 years ago when our kids were half done being raised. And man, I wish somebody would have told me that early on, because with every year of your child's life, you're losing control, but hopefully replacing it with influence. And now, as a dad with adult kids, influence is all I got. And the fastest way for me to squander influence is to be controlling. And Jim Burns wrote a great book on doing life with your adult children. And the subtitle of the book, I tell people, is worth the entire price of the book. And it's keep the welcome mat out and your mouth shut. If you want to be a parent of influence, keep the welcome mat out and your mouth shut. And I wish I would have learned that, because and my parents did this for my brother and I without anybody really teaching them this. But they let us become adults early on. Like you could just see them letting go of the reins as we were becoming teenagers. I can remember in high school something would come up that was last minute, and I would call home and be like, "Hey, Mom, this is going on. Can I go to this?" And she'd be like, "That's your decision." I'd be like, "Don't put that on me. Like, I need you. I want to be able to still lean on you." But so my parents put decision-making in our hands early on. And then I go to college and have a roommate whose parents put no decision-making in their hands early on. And I think it's one of the biggest mistakes we make as parents, just treating our children like children right up until the very day we expect them to be an adult. And so I would let go earlier. And obviously, there are big decisions our kids need to make that I want to be a part of, and I am influencing those decisions. But I would start releasing control earlier and earlier on than I did. And my kids were in here right now. They'd be like, "Yeah, we wish you would have learned that too. Earlier. I wish somebody would have told you that earlier on." And Jim taught me this, and my daughter, Amen, says it's the best thing Jim Burns ever taught was, Ted, you don't need to turn every moment into a life lesson.
Oh, man.
And it's a problem for you and I, right?
Totally.
As content people and as pastors.
I can't tell you how many times my boys said, "Dad, I don't need another sermon." Right? And it is. But I'm like, "No, I'm going to influence you right now." Or I'm going to coach you. And I love your statement of helping people go from control. Because like when they're little, I mean, yes,
you have to brush your teeth. You have to make sure they eat this and don't eat that.
You have control, but then you slowly have to be moving from, control to more of a coach and then a consultant. And then you just hope that in the process, I mean, there's that deep level of influence. And I think that one of the greatest things now, and, I'm a parent of adult children as well, 20 and 23. And when they call and they ask for my advice,
those are
because that means, I mean, I've made a ton of mistakes in giving unsolicited advice, which out of that book that Jim Burns wrote, I think the line is in that book: unsolicited advice comes across as criticism.
Boom.
And so just really being mindful of that, then, I mean, that, by the way, this as well as I do too, that is transferable. not just in our kids, but in our marriages, you know, and in our workplaces, and thinking about, you know, are we entering conversations with, you know, curiosity versus certainty?
Yeah.
And so trying to really, that's one thing I wish that I would have, you know, learned earlier on.
Yeah.
And mine is instead of getting upset about, hey, you came home late or whatever, saying, and this is why I know in my head as to why you're late, but entering that discussion in with more curiosity and allowing conversation to flow from that, instead of just coming in right away, which already conversation can't happen, right? Because there is no curiosity there. And then a statement, I think that this, you and I have maybe talked about this in the past as well, but you know, I think about you just said, you know, the days go slow, but the years go fast. And just this whole idea that we will be parents of adult children far longer than we'll be parents of children, however you want to say that, like little children.
Meaning our season of influence is greater than our season of control.
Oh, 100%. And when you think about just I'll never forget, like, and I told the story actually at a recent corporate event because I was Isaiah, one time we had some friends come into town and he went to go pick up a bunch of Chinese food for everybody, right? I said, hey, this is what I need you to order. But he was thinking, well, man, I don't want to spend too much money. I don't want to whatever. So like, I'll just get this. And so we got all small portions and whatever. So we didn't have enough food, basically. And he comes home and I'm like, dude, like I told you what to get, whatever. I got upset. And I had a friend, you know, pull me aside, said, hey, can you just come out to the patio really quick? And I said, yeah, well, yeah, sure. And he goes, dude, what are you doing? You're getting upset with, you know, for not getting enough Chinese food. So you're willing to like start an argument that could impact your relationship now and your relationship in the future over the fear of not having enough food for us as your guests. Think about how silly that is.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that he had the freedom and we had the relationship for him to tell me that, right? And so I oftentimes I don't know if you do this, but I usually tend to talk a lot about my failures when I'm speaking in hopes that people are learning from, you know, my failures. And that's where I think conversations like this are so helpful, because if we all want to go back and say, boy, I wish I could have done this different. But here's the thing that I just always want to remind people too is, God's grace for us as individuals is so great. And oftentimes I feel like even just, I look at the mistakes that I made as a dad, specifically in the parenting category. I'm just so grateful for the grace of my boys. And they have been so grace-filled towards me, right? And it's not just because of just, well, okay, Dad, you didn't really have somebody at home, so you don't know what you're doing. Although they did tell me that one time, several times too. But it's also just because, you know, we all need grace, and you're not a perfect individual. So I mean, I would just tell the parents out there that maybe are saying, man, I have screwed up a ton. That, you know, there's grace for that, but own that.
Yeah.
And so I went after that. I went to Z and I was like, but I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was not a big deal.
Well, and it's one of the reasons why I've been talking more about parenting at date night comedy events, because I did a corporate event last year, and the CEO pulled me aside and said, you know, we do research with all of our employees and all of our directors and everything, and marriage and family across the board, whether they have kids at home or don't have kids at home, or whether they have kids yet at all, they want to hear about parenting, because think about it with parenting. When you listen to someone talk about parenting, I'm thinking about how I was parented.
Yep.
I'm thinking about how I parented. My kids are gone. And what I've found with a lot of seniors is they listen to parenting talks intently because they want to know, what did we get right? What didn't we get right? And then that's why I end with, don't feed your regrets. Ask Jesus to redeem your remaining days. Delete the narratives that says it's too late, it's my fault. You can have a great relationship with your adult children years later, no matter what wounds are on the heart or messages are on the heart. So a lot of times people think the parenting is just for, I'm in the moment. I loved, because, you know, I made this joke. It's a true story, but sitting around the campfire last year with my adult kids going, you know, and I don't know why, I still don't know why I said it. I just must have been in a moment. We had good barbecue or something. I went,
sometimes you and I don't send stuff through the filter, Ted. That's why
you don't have to say everything you think.
Yeah.
But I said, I'm kicked back in an Adirondack chair going, you know, I don't really have any regrets as a parent. I released that like a flock of doves, and And then I say, for the next hour, my kids gave me some real solid examples that I can hang my hat on. I mean, it was like after an hour, I shut it down. All right, I'm good. I got it. It's plenty.
I believe the word you used was not solid examples, concrete.
They
were concrete.
Not just when we argued. Oh my God. I remember I still see my daughter's face when I said I don't have any regrets. She's like, what?
But the beauty of that too, though, it's like, and you think about it, just that you can laugh at that, right? You can laugh at that, and you can say, "Man, I can't believe I did that." And there is redemption that comes, especially when we allow that to happen.
You want to hear the story? The worst regret I have.
Well, first of all, I do.
That my daughter said to me, "I still can't. This is gonna get me in trouble online." So we may edit this part out. So
we won't.
A stray cat came into the neighborhood. My daughter loves cats, was an animal lover, and she started really taking on this outdoor cat. We wouldn't allow the cat inside. Never allowed the cats inside. Cat and the cat was a nuisance. Let's just be real honest with you. There's some good cats and there's some rough cats that did tear things up. Okay, there's dog people. Cats go to and dogs go to. No, anyway. So Amy tells me one morning, she goes, "You gotta get rid of that cat." And by get rid of that cat, it went to a no-kill shelter that we have in Taney County that they adopt them out. And so I just take the cat. I take it to be adopted out. I had to pay the adoption fee on this stray cat.
Yeah.
So I didn't, because Amy said, do not call animal control because that can't be guaranteed what happens to the cat. So my daughter comes home and she's looking for that cat. Now, this is one of the worst parenting moments you could ever have. I didn't tell Corinne what happened. I let her outside searching for this cat for about an hour. And Amy,
we haven't seen Jingles. I don't know.
I said, Amy, she's out there looking for the cat right now. And Amy's like, tell her what happened. The cat went to the shelter. This is why she was in high school or something. Corinne got in the crawl space looking for this cat. And I finally told her. She comes to the kitchen. And I mean, so when they were giving me those concrete examples, that was the first one. You remember the cat from my sophomore year in high school? Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's
and it wasn't that I removed this cat from our neighborhood. It was that I let her search for this cat for an hour.
That's good. If you wouldn't have told her, she'd probably still be searching.
Or at Christmas, she's 40 years old. Dad, you remember that cat we had? I wonder whatever happened to that thing. Now that would be almost disqualifying in ministry if I didn't tell my daughter 25 years later.
You could have totally reenacted that scene from Christmas Vacation. Wrap the cat. Could have done that. Okay, we got to get wrapped up, but I want to hit this last one, my friend. Man, it's always so good. It's so good when we get to hang out together, and it's fun and it's fruitful at the same time. So last topic, advice that you would go back and give your newlywed self, specifically in an area that we all love to joke about, but that is the in-laws.
Yeah, and look how quickly you moved from parenting to in-laws.
Yeah.
I came out of the parenting season and became an in-law. And so I would say 3 things to my newlywed self. Establish boundaries early. And that's not enough. You have to communicate them often. That's number 2. And I work with way too many couples who think they have boundaries established, but assume their parents know. You don't assume nothing. You have to, and if the boundaries change as your kids change, as they grow,
that's good. That's good.
You have to adjust your boundaries, but you have to keep your parents up to date. Because I think what happens, especially when you're 22 and 21, which is the age we were when Amy and I got married, we still felt very obliged to our parents planning for holidays and special events.
Yeah.
And I would say, Ted, Amy, you have the freedom to do whatever you want at Christmas. Like you're your own home now.
So that's the in-laws' responsibility is what you're saying.
No,
it can be helpful.
My responsibility is to establish the boundaries. And one of them can be as simple as we're going to visit you, mom and dad, my mom and dad, every other Christmas. Amy's parents every other Christmas. So that's the boundary.
Got it.
But then you have to communicate it to both sides. Here's how we're doing vacations. Here's how we do the kids coming over, once we start having kids. Establish them early on, communicate them, and then in all things, honor your father and mother. Esteem them as highly valuable. Do not take personal responsibility for your parents' emotions, words, or actions. establishing boundaries is done in kindness. Communicating them is done in love and honor.
Yeah.
Yeah, do that early on, and don't have a, let's just see how this works out. Because I work with a lot of couples that can't get on the same page with the boundary. Your parents are not responsible for the boundaries. That's husband and wife are coming up with the boundaries.
Yeah.
Okay. Then once you are together on the same page, a united front, then communicate them to mom and dad, and be clear. And clarity is king in establishing boundaries. And I just see too many people. I think it's cruel to have a boundary that you're not communicating well and in a kind, loving.
So if you haven't established, I mean, let's just say we got some listeners that married 15 years, right?
And mom's still in charge.
Right.
Mom's still calling the shots.
How do you establish those boundaries now? I mean, number one, obviously you got to be on the same page, which is that is not a small component.
No.
Because I mean, there's still a lot of where, mom's still in charge, and there's a comfort in having mom still be in charge, for the couple sometimes, at least in one person's mind. So how does that conversation even happen? Like when you're talking with these couples that have been married for a significant amount of time with no boundaries with in-laws, like where do you start on that?
Yeah. Husband and wife first and foremost, because especially if you come from a larger family, even 3-4 siblings. I mean, your mom's trying to get everybody at her house at the same time. You may have to die to some dreams. Because if you have 2 large families you're dealing with, to get 2 extended families coordinated to where everybody's happy, you got to drop that expectation right off the bat. I mean, I have a friend who wanted to wake up every morning in his parents' house on Christmas, and his wife was like, I want my kids getting in their PJs on Christmas Eve, special Christmas PJs, waking up in our house on Christmas. And I just told him, you guys got to get on the same page first. And then this is about your family, communicating it to your extended family, and mom's responsible for her emotions. So whether you're doing this in the first year, which obviously early on is better, or you're doing it 10 years later or 20 years later, it's never too late to start with boundaries, and you'll have a healthier relationship so long as it's communicated. And don't let a parent guilt you into backing out of what's best for your immediate family.
Well, you said the statement of clarity is king, and another statement that you've seen around is the clarity is kind. And just figuring out like, hey, this is actually out of kindness, and it's going to really help the relationship. And I think that why I was seeking some clarification earlier from you on just the boundaries was because I think then the in-laws' responsibility is to allow those boundaries to be put in place. And
they want to honor
and
them.
to give freedom for that, because like that's if you're lording it over them and making them feel bad about those boundaries that are, that's not going to be good for their relationship either.
And that's something Jim says that's key. When your child leaves home and their life fills up with all sorts of new activities and opportunities, follow their lead. So mom and dad, instead of sitting home with an empty house at a holiday, go do something. Like plan new. I know this is how you've done it for 20 years or 30 years, but your relationship as empty nesters is different than it was when you had kids in the home. So follow their lead. Go do something. Don't sit around and wait for your kids. You're still a couple, and you get to establish boundaries.
Yeah.
So you get to say, hey, Friday night, your dad and I go out on this date. So can't take the grandkids on Friday night. So we think boundaries are a one-way street.
Yeah.
And I'm setting them, mom and dad, you honor them. Well, but guess what? Mom and dad get to set boundaries too. And I, as their children, get to honor them.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, that Laura and I, as empty nesters now, some of the greatest joys that we have, I mean, obviously we love being with our boys and all that kind of stuff. But is when we look at the calendar and then we just put on there, hey, here's what we're going to do quarterly. And it was so funny because we started doing some random stuff when both the boys were out of the house, and both of them, they're like, you guys are going to where? Like, you were doing so much more stuff like now than you ever did with us.
Wait till we get the house paid off. You have no idea the level of excitement that's going to come.
Yeah. So, well, brother, this has been so fun. I mean, like I said, this is why you're a 3-timer. You're a RESGEN Giving Life Podcast 3-timer, because I get so much fun, but also so fruitful. Such good conversation where you can really walk away, and if like I walk away and say, okay, how do I implement this in my life? And I know that that's what listeners do too. So thank you again for being here. And as you know, because you're or irregular. We always kind of end with the final word, just, 30 to 60, 90 seconds, whatever you want to do, whether it be a scripture, maybe it's a summation of something we've already talked about, something new that you just say like, hey, here's a thought that I just want to end and leave with listeners today. So what do you got for a final word for us?
The one that keeps coming back to me that ties in the mentoring with all of this is Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 4, where the daughters of Jerusalem say to Solomon and the Shulamite woman, we rejoice and delight in you. We will praise your love more than wine. And we say it in Branson. You've heard me say it, I don't know how many times. Every marriage is a duet in need of great backup singers. And that's what we call mentors in the marriage space, backup singers. You have duets in your circle of influence, in your family, and be the person that is rejoicing and delighting and praising the love, not just of your child, not just of your friend, but of the relationship. And I want to be known for that in my community, in my church, in my family, that dad is a champion for the couples around him, and he will always be picturing a special future for them. And that's ending where we started with, that was Gary for Amy and I. I mean, Gary and Norma Smalley, we get to be with Norma tomorrow afternoon. I get Corinne and my son-in-law with me, go see her for a little bit, but down in Dallas. But I'd love to meet with her every chance I can, because they rejoice and delight in Amy. I mean, we're where we are today because we had great backup singers.
So good. So good. I love you. Thanks so much for your time, brother. And listen, I can't wait for date night tonight, and that we continue to do ministry together.
I appreciate you, Tom. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Giving Life Podcast, everybody. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ted Cunningham today. If you found it helpful, I encourage you to share it with others who may find it helpful as well. All right. That's all I got for you today. Thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you next time on the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. Until then, continue being men whose life in Christ gives life to others. We'll see you next time.